Our electoral college has its origins in ancient history. From the Romans to the Visigoths, colleges of nobles would elect a leader who would then ascend to kingship. This was a step away from hereditary rulers and a step towards a republic system of government. Even the Vatican had a college of cardinals since 1059, and for 1,000 years have been electing popes. The faithful did not vote directly for the Pope, but their representatives did. Our founders broke away from this King George syndrome, forming a republic where the people voted for representatives and those reps make the laws. In our Great Compromise, the founders were faced with small states refusing to join the Union if the larger states could use their giant populations to injure the smaller states. The resulting Electoral College reflects an American fairness doctrine that minority rights and minority states shall not be outvoted by a strict democracy system. That's the basic problem with a pure democracy. It involves 3 wolves and 2 sheep deciding who's for dinner. The sheep always loses. In a pure democracy, the minority is always outvoted. Sounds like California today. Our Constitution solved this problem by giving each state 2 senators, regardless of population. The Electoral College is closely bound with minority rights and Republican ideals. Under the electoral system, smaller states have more voting power per person than larger states. This comports with the concept of a republic, a system that shows respect for minority rights, for smaller states, and for smaller counties. Today, California has 40 million people, which is way more than the 13 colonies put together. And there's some talk of splitting the state to create more fairness for rural views. By dividing California, we're talking about the rural areas rejecting big city themes like high taxes, low morals, school propaganda, and riots. California's rural areas are looking for safe borders, effective schools, useful learning, parental choice, vouchers. Rural areas are pro-business, pro-family, pro-freedom. These are conservative values. Looking at the Electoral College effect, we can see big cities today operate like the big states did in the 1700s. These giant cities like LA, San Francisco, and San Diego determine all political decisions. This creates a disparity of power, and many rural counties and persons are underserved and underrepresented. Their reasonable, non-hysterical viewpoints are thwarted every time by big city demagoguery. Prior to 1967, California had state assembly and Senate seats per county, regardless of population. This was deemed fair because the big cities could not rule over the rural counties. This kept the city populations of unruly, hysterical mobs from implementing loony ideas. Today, our cities are breeding grounds for critical race theory, stoking race hatred, mandating mania, lockdowns, orders, closures, riots, lawlessness, and general hysteria. Today's cities are the left's playthings, with Fed Reserve banks doling out paper dollars, funding think tanks, media outlets, universities, nonprofits, and their army of leftists Antifa-kids, angry infidels, and brotherhoods ready to riot, loot, and burn, baby, burn at the drop of a beret. Our cities are now riot factories and indoctrination centers. Their main goal in election season is to terrify the normal people into voting against whomever is a target of the riots. Against all this big city hysteria are the balancing principles of a republic. To lessen the power of these factories of fanaticism by granting rural areas additional voting power, where more sensible, calm, and civil ideas are the rule. And that's the final word. Our guests today are Professor Peter Naylor. Professor Naylor was a Brookings Institute Fellow in the 1970s and a longtime economics professor at Santa Barbara City College. Also joining us, Craig Farnsworth, editor at the I Am Dependent magazine, and our moderator and media mogul, Gary Michaels. Good day, Gary. What's on our plate?
All right. And our first guest is Peter Naylor, Professor Peter Naylor, who goes by Peter. Does our representative system work to actually express the people's will? In your opinion, is the Electoral College any good?
Well, that's pretty strong. I don't want to make such a great normative statement. I think what's important is to understand why we have an electoral college. And remember, we had an American Revolution, which truly was a revolution because a bunch of prominent people in 13 colonies said, we're going to try democracy. We know it's been tried before, and we know it has usually failed because a majority will form around some charismatic figure like Caesar, and they will seize power. So we're not too worried about George III. We're already rid of him. Remember, we got a Continental Congress writing the Constitution. But what we are worried about is the problem of tyranny of majority, which has destroyed all prior democracy. So what do we do about that? Answer: half of the Constitution is about how we select, what are the powers of, and how do we remove the president. This was clearly a very important issue. Electoral College then says, you will have electors based on population, one for every member of the House, and by state, one for every senator. And if you want to get elected, you need to get a majority of these electors. And that means you have to appeal to a whole bunch of different constituencies. That was the protection. The danger of a popular vote for the president, which has been proposed by some, is that then you will get a majority which will trample on the minority. The Electoral College really says, if you want to have major change, if you want to elect someone with an agenda like the Franklin Roosevelt, you must bring along a majority of constituencies across the whole country. And that's the idea.
Well, what I was going to ask you, Peter, is the demographics of the country have changed since this was all set up. So it seems to me it's probably less an issue about equal representation of minorities, but you seem to see it differently. Is that so?
Well, yeah, we tend to think of minorities in very specific categories. I'm talking about diversity of our people. And that diversity can be regional, religious, cultural, racial, gender, whatever. It's been broadening our representation. Of course, remember, women couldn't vote, blacks couldn't vote. I do think one of the ways maybe you were heading is, why do we still have 435 representatives? We got 330 million people. We might be better off with 3,000 representatives so that they can actually know the people in their district. But that's a whole different subject from Electoral College.
So one more question to ask, Peter. Isn't part of this all that the Electoral College was created because the people weren't trusted to make their own electoral decisions?
The danger, of course, demagoguery. The danger was actions. But the solution was, hey, let's create a system that requires fluctuating coalitions of many factions, and we'll never get one dominant faction that can be tyrannical. Interesting concept, and so far it's worked pretty well.
Well, I'm glad to hear your point on that, Peter. Tom, I'd like to take this to you. I think you've been sitting there waiting to respond. So please give us your input of the Electoral College and how you see its relevance today in America.
Well, I think Peter laid it out very well. as to the reasons and how it functions. It keeps the masses from suddenly being inflamed by a newspaper article and voting against one party or the other. Instead, it puts it into the hands of elected representatives who are supposedly more sober and less able to be, flipped by a momentary event. But the thing is, at the time, they didn't want, the founders did not want the small states to be overpowered by the large states. So they said, oh, look, small states, you can join. Don't worry. New York will not wipe you out, Rhode Island, because each state will have 2 senators, and that will make it a little more balanced. Even the big states have 2, the small states have 2. So now, where I'd like to take it is to California. Now, California today is 40 million people. That's almost twice the population of the 13 colonies when these early events were going on after the revolution and when the Electoral College was put into place. So California is bigger than the entire nation when it started. And one of the results is that in California, we don't have an electoral system. It's sort of each county, each group now has been turned into a district, and each district has the same number of people. And each district has a senator and has a state senator and it has a state assembly person. The deal is now is that the big population centers have more power than the smaller populated open areas. And so what we need, I'm going to propose that we need in California is an electoral system. It goes against the republic idea where you have a way to protect minority rights. These farmers, these people in the oil industry that are out in the Kern County, they don't have 10 million people to vote. But what's happening is the cities are telling the oil people, no, you're not gonna search for oil. We're gonna buy it from Saudi Arabia. And so what we have is a trampling of minority rights.
Let me ask you on that point. There are 58 counties in California, and they range in size from the smallest of, I think, which is Alpine County, to of the scale of Los Angeles County and some of the others in the state. So there's 58 counties and I think 482 municipalities. Right now we have 40 state senators and 80 assembly members in the legislature. How would you really work this out based on what you just proposed?
After 1961, the Supreme Court came in and said you cannot have unrepresentative government in the states. And this was a big shock because the Supreme Court for so long said, we're not going to get into state elections. It says in the Constitution, the legislatures of the states shall control the time, place, and method of elections, and the Supreme Court should not get into it. But they finally won out. The Supreme Court said, okay, states, we decided we're going to get in there and you have to apportion your populations directly.
Comment on the Supreme Court reapportionment decision to say whether there's anything the federal government could do to support it.
Quite obviously, the right to fair representation, to have each vote count equally, it seems to me, basic to the successful operation of a democracy.
And so this took away the advantage of the bigger counties. And the result, strangely enough, was that there were more Democrat votes. The problem is that creates a direct democracy, which is not what we are. We're a republic, and a republic, indicates that you have a representative. You hire representatives, you vote for them, and it may not be equal. We don't have 300 million representatives. We have a much smaller number. So the point is, these large population centers are wiping out the minority rights of these small population counties within the states.
Great American ideal is that everyone shall be entitled to equal protection under the laws.
These ideas are really great, but there's that sticky problem that what happens the electoral systems create the possibility of the loser winning the popular vote. We've seen this happen before. Peter, please.
What's odd is, you remember we have a House of Representatives and a Senate, and the Senate has 6-year terms, and originally they were appointed by the state legislators. And the idea was that the Senate would resist the temporary passions that animated the representatives. Once you make the Senate in California a popular body elected same way as the assemblymen, but different, territories and fewer of them, there's really no point in having a Senate because they're both popular bodies. It provides more jobs and sinecures and whatever. If we can't figure out a role for the Senate, which would protect minorities, then maybe we shouldn't have a state Senate. It's superfluous. There's another change that Tom didn't mention that was important, and Jess Unruh was our speaker. I think we all remember Jess, the mentor of Billy Brown, and the two of them were so dominant in the assembly for 30 years. And Jess was a friend of mine, and about a year before he passed away, he was state treasurer at the time. And of course, the state treasurer's office is in LA, making Tom's point. And I said, Jess, is there anything that you regret? Now, those of us who remember Jess remember that he was most famous for two things. Money is the mother's milk of politics, and the professionalization of the California legislature. That is full-time paid representatives. I asked him, is there anything that you regret? And he said, yeah, we never should have professionalized the legislature. It was better when they were part-time.
Well, I for one like the Electoral College at the federal level. I think it's a great idea. It's worked for 240 years to quell the passions that would be, that would occur where people can just suddenly see a newspaper article and say, oh, I'm not voting for that president. He killed his dog. Whereas if you have an Electoral College, it tempers that. These people in the college are more reserved, and they're not, inflamed to passions. And that was the whole point. And also they protected the minority rights by having Rhode Island gets 2 senators, so that means they get 2 electors. And the problem in California is that we don't have that now. we have San Francisco telling Kern County they cannot drill for oil anymore. And they have farmers being told you can't get water anymore. So this seems totally unfair. Talk about minority rights. I thought that, the left was so concerned with that. But here we have a group of farmers, a group of oil workers, all their families, being destroyed because the cities decide they, stop oil and water production.
Maybe something similar could work at the state level. I don't have anything in mind, but the notion that what could we do that would compel our statewide candidates to need to listen to the voices in the entire state?